Corrupt Judge Edward Chen dismissed in court for trying to jail Pam Bondi. The air inside the military courtroom at Maxwell Air Force Base was thick with anticipation. Rows of uniformed officers sat in tense silence booths, lined up like a firing squad. The oak-paneled walls bore the weight of the room's history, court-martials, tribunals, and now something else entirely. It was 900 hours sharp when the heavy double doors creaked open. Colonel Pam Bondi walked in her posture, straight, her expression unreadable. She wore her crisp dress blues like armor, her insignia glinting beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. There was no doubt she was here to fight, but not just any fight. Today she was going up against a man many considered untouchable, Brigadier General Edward Chen, Chief Military Judge of the Southern Command. For over a decade he had presided over high-profile military justice cases with a cold efficiency and a reputation for making or breaking careers. Chen entered moments after Bondi. The room stood as protocol dictated. He barely acknowledged anyone, his robe flowing over his uniform as he took the bench. His narrowed eyes scanned the courtroom and landed squarely on Bondi. "Colonel Bondi," he said, voice low and clipped. "You're leading the defense in this matter, I am, Your Honor," she replied evenly. He raised an eyebrow. "Interesting choice. This tribunal concerns sensitive procurement violations, military contracts, and classified deployments. I assumed someone with more experience in defense contracting would be assigned." The insult was subtle, wrapped in decorum, but everyone heard it. Bondi remained still, her gaze locked on him. "With respect, General, I'm more than qualified," she said. Chen smiled faintly, a predator sizing up his prey. "We'll see." From the prosecution table, Major James Moretti shifted uncomfortably. His team exchanged glances, sensing the tension. At the back of the courtroom, CID Special Agent Marcus Rivera sat quietly, his notepad already half full. The case was officially about a misallocation of drone maintenance funds, millions that had vanished through a maze of shell contracts. But beneath that was a darker suspicion that the judge himself was part of the scheme. For now, only Bondi and a select few knew what was coming. As the hearing began, Chen took every opportunity to interrupt Bondi. Every objection was overruled before she could finish. Every point she raised was met with a cold, "Noted, move on." But she had expected this. For the past 6 months, her team had been building a case not just for her client, a junior logistics officer accused of fraud, but against Chen himself. And this morning that case would begin to unfold. An hour into the session, Chen sighed theatrically. "Colonel Bondi, I suggest you reconsider your approach. At this rate, your client might want to explore a plea deal. Unless, of course, your defense strategy is based on charm rather than law." The jab drew chuckles from 2 officers seated near the gallery. Bondi didn't flinch. She gathered her papers slowly, then spoke. "Your Honor, I have no intention of requesting a plea deal, and I would appreciate it if the court refrained from characterizing my strategy with personal remarks." Chen leaned back, noted. "Let's proceed," he turned to Moretti. "Major, I trust your side is prepared to present evidence. We are, Your Honor." Bondi returned to her seat beside her co-counsel, Captain Elena Park. Under the table, Park slid her a sealed manila envelope. Bondi nodded once, never taking her eyes off Chen. Time passed. Testimonies were read. Contracts reviewed. Yet every time Bondi made a point, Chen found a way to cut her off. The tension in the courtroom built like a coiled spring. Then, during a recess, something changed. As Chen disappeared into chambers, Bondi stood and walked calmly to the clerk. "I'm entering a motion into the record," she said, "accompanied by classified documentation per protocol, outlined under Article 27 of the Military Justice Act." The clerk raised an eyebrow but nodded. The file was marked "Urgent, eyes only." When court reconvened, Bondi stood again. "Your Honor, before we proceed with the prosecution's next witness, the defense would like to raise a procedural matter." Chen looked annoyed. Colonel, I warned you about wasting this court's time. This is not a waste. It concerns Judicial Conduct Regulation 2A, impartiality and integrity. The room stilled. Are you implying misconduct? Chen's tone sharpened. I'm not implying anything, she said, voice steady. I'm stating that the defense has evidence documented, verified, and authenticated that suggests a conflict of interest on the part of the presiding judge. Gasps echoed from the back of the room. Chen's face darkened. Colonel Bondi, you're skating dangerously close to contempt. With respect, Your Honor, I'm invoking my duty to ensure a fair trial, and the defense is submitting evidence of unauthorized communications between yourself and Mr. Max Harrington, CEO of Gulfstream Defense Corp. Chen blinked. The name hit like a thunderclap. Bondi continued, we have transcripts of conversations obtained through lawful federal surveillance. These include statements discussing, quote, ensuring favorable outcomes in cases under your purview. At the mention of surveillance, Rivera stood from the gallery and approached the bench. I can verify that, sir, he said. I'm Agent Marcus Rivera, Criminal Investigation Division, under orders from Army Central Command. Chen's jaw clenched. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Bondi opened a thick binder on the evidence cart. We're also submitting financial records, offshore transfers, email chains, all connected to rulings that favored Gulfstream Defense Corp., many of which occurred within 48 hours of said payments. Chen slammed his gavel. Enough, this is a circus. This should have been brought through appropriate channels. Bondi cut him off for the first time. We did. 3 times. All disappeared from the official record. The room was dead silent. Rivera stepped forward again. Per CID policy, we're requesting the court enter immediate recess and secure all case documents under federal oversight. Chen looked like he might explode. Instead, he straightened his robe and muttered, this court is in recess for 30 minutes. As he exited the bench, his hands trembled. Bondi remained standing. Captain Park leaned in and whispered, it's started. Bondi nodded. We just broke the seal. The moment the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, the energy in the air changed. No longer tense, now electric. Outside, the narrow halls of the Maxwell Air Base legal wing buzzed with quiet speculation. Officers whispered behind coffee cups. Paralegals huddled near copy machines. Everyone had seen what just happened, and everyone knew the rules had just changed. Inside the defense room, Colonel Pam Bondi stood at the long table surrounded by her legal team. That was the easy part, she said, removing her gloves and setting them neatly on the folder marked Evidence B. Now comes the storm. Captain Park looked up from her laptop. CID just confirmed Agent Rivera has been joined by 3 more investigators. They're positioned at all exits, good Bondi replied. No one interferes with the chain of custody. Across the base, Brigadier General Edward Chen paced his chambers like a man waking from a bad dream. He yanked his robe off, tossing it onto a chair, then stared at the phone on his desk. His hand hovered. Call whom? The chief judge of the circuit, his wife, his contact at Gulfstream. None of them could help him now. When the 30-minute recess passed with no sign of the judge returning, the courtroom stirred. Officers filtered back in slowly, but their posture had shifted. The deference once given to Chen now hung in the air, like an unresolved question. CID agents stood at corners, like shadows, their presence silent, but unmistakable. Then the door opened, but not the one the judge normally used. A woman in a tailored charcoal gray military suit stepped in her brass identification badge, clipped front and center. Deputy Director Lauren Vasquez, Department of Defense Office of Public Integrity. She was flanked by 2 military police officers in full gear. She didn't need to raise her voice. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, I am here to inform you that Brigadier General Edward Chen has been detained pending formal charges of judicial misconduct, bribery, obstruction of justice, and violations under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The room didn't gasp, it inhaled. This tribunal is suspended. The defendant's case will be reassigned to a new military judge, and a comprehensive review of every case handled by General Chen in the past 5 years is now underway. No one spoke. Several reporters in uniform fumbled for their notebooks. One juror actually wept. Vasquez turned to the jury. "You are all dismissed with the thanks of the court. You may be recalled at a later date." As the jurors filed out, Bondi remained still, her face composed, hands folded at her waist. Vasquez approached her. "Colonel, I understand you have additional documentation relevant to our broader investigation." "Yes," Director Bondi replied. 17 cases, each showing consistent patterns, preferential rulings, evidence suppression off-record meetings. Captain Park handed over a flash drive and a thick binder. Vasquez took them with care. "You've done a lot more than defend a client, Colonel. You exposed cancer in the system." Bondi's voice was cool. He underestimated everyone, including the uniform. In the hallway, a low hum turned into movement. Marshals began forming a corridor. Cameras flashed behind the security checkpoint. At exactly 14:52, the chamber door opened once more, and this time Chen emerged in handcuffs. The man who had once towered from the bench now shuffled between two MPs. His uniform was still neat, but it looked tight, like it no longer belonged to him. His face, usually a sculpted mask of authority, had gone slack with disbelief. He scanned the room and locked eyes with Bondi. At that moment, the courtroom froze again. There was no hate in her gaze, no gloating, only finality. Chen hesitated before being escorted through the exit reserved for prisoner transfer. The handcuffs around his wrists flashed once in the light, metallic and cold. As he disappeared from view, the tension in the room released like a balloon, finally exhaling. Vasquez turned back to the court. "Let this be a message," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur. "The integrity of military justice will be defended by those brave enough to hold even our own accountable." The room applauded, not out of celebration, but out of relief. In the hours that followed, the entire base became a hive of inquiry. CID teams spread through administrative buildings, collecting logs, server access histories, and sealed transcripts. Court officers who had once carried out Chen's orders were now questioned about inconsistencies in rulings. Some were cooperative, some weren't. Meanwhile, the prosecution team, led by Major Moretti, gathered in a briefing room adjacent to the legal wing. "I had no idea," Moretti admitted, flipping through Bondi's evidentiary index. "None of us did." Bondi looked at him directly. "Then your office needs better walls," because he was hiding in plain sight. "You're right," he said. "We'll be running a full internal review. Every case that went through his docket. Every deal is signed with Gulfstream. Start with the Evans case," she replied. 3 years ago. That was the blueprint. Moretti nodded solemnly. "We owe you." "No," Bondi said. "You owe the people your office was meant to protect." By evening, the Pentagon issued an official statement confirming Judge Chen's suspension and pending prosecution under the UCMJ and federal RICO statutes. News outlets picked it up within the hour. Headlines blared, "Military judge taken down by decorated JAG officer in courtroom showdown. Brigadier General arrested in corruption probe. Led by Colonel Pam Bondi outside the gates of Maxwell Air Base. News vans lined the roads." Inside, Colonel Bondi sat alone in the defense room. She stared at her laptop screen, now filled with follow-up tasks, motion filings, media coordination case, reassignment notices. But her eyes weren't on the screen, they were in the photo beside it. A black and white image of a young airman, her father. He had served at Maxwell long before she did. She remembered the stories he told, about honor, about truth, about holding the line even when it bent. A knock on the door. Park peeked in. "They're ready for the post-brief, ma'am." Bondi rose, adjusted her collar, and grabbed her notes. As she stepped into the hallway, she could hear voices officers discussing her case, younger Jags whispering her name. But she didn't look back. Because the fight wasn't over. She was just getting started. The post-action briefing took place in a Stark operations room, just down the hall from courtroom 7. No windows, no cameras. Just gray walls, a long metal table, and the weight of what had just happened. Colonel Pam Bondi stood at the head of the table. Around her sat representatives from CID JAG and the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. Deputy Director Lauren Vasquez led the internal review. On the table in front of Bondi lay a binder nearly 4 inches thick, the final briefing dossier she and her team had compiled on Brigadier General Edward Chen. "Let's walk through this," Vasquez said, nodding for Bondi to begin. Bondi opened the binder. Section 1 covers the offshore financial transfers. Every deposit aligns within 48 hours of favorable rulings benefiting Gulfstream Defense Corp. Or its front companies. She flipped pages. Section 2 details the suppressed evidence. In at least 3 unrelated trials, Chen denied exculpatory motions. Without explanation motions we now know involved whistleblower testimony he deliberately excluded. She slid a page forward. Section 3 outlines his private communications, 26 emails, 8 phone calls, 3 in-person meetings with executives directly profiting from guilty verdicts. The room was silent. "Do you have confirmation on all these sources?" Vasquez asked. "Yes. Authenticated by CID and the DoD Forensic Intelligence Lab." Vasquez nodded. "Continue." Bondi reached the final section. Section 4 highlights patterns of bias. Cases where identical legal arguments were treated differently. One dismissed the other, allowed based solely on the identity of the attorney or the affiliation of the defendant. Captain Park added, "We cross-referenced his rulings. The discrepancies are statistically impossible to explain by discretion alone." Someone let out a low whistle. Even in a room full of hardened professionals, the implications were staggering. Vasquez sat back. "We've seen corruption, but this was a weaponized law. Precision targeting from the bench." Bondi closed the binder. "That's exactly what it was." An aide entered the room with an update. "Chen has been transferred to an off-base holding facility pending arraignment. His military clearance has been suspended. We've locked his office and seized his personal drives." Another folder was passed around. "The Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit has already signed the order for case reassignment. Judge Henry Stokes will preside going forward." Bondi nodded. Stokes was strict but clean. He wouldn't be bought. The briefing wrapped 30 minutes later. As everyone began to file out, Vasquez remained behind. She approached Bondi privately. "You should know this is going to explode across all military branches. You exposed one of our own, publicly. There will be pressure, pushback." "I didn't sign up to stay quiet," Bondi replied. "I know," Vasquez said. "That's why I trust you." Then she handed Bondi a sealed envelope. "There's a meeting at the Pentagon in 48 hours. You'll be flown out. Top brass wants to hear from you firsthand." Bondi accepted it without blinking. Understood. Later that night, Bondi sat on the concrete steps behind the legal building alone with her thoughts and a lukewarm cup of coffee. Captain Park found her there. "You okay?" Park asked. Bondi exhaled. "I should be, but I'm not sure I am. Because he got what he deserved? No. Because it took too long." Park sat beside her. "We weren't supposed to win that case," Bondi continued. "He stacked the deck, controlled the timing, the rulings, even the tone in the room, and we still had to act like the system was intact." Park didn't reply. She didn't need to. Bondi had just said what many JAG officers had felt for years, but never spoken aloud. "You were brilliant today," Park finally said. "Calm, precise. You buried him with the truth." Bondi gave a tired smile. "I buried the image. But we haven't found the roots yet. You think others were involved? I know it." She sipped her coffee. "People like Chen don't work alone. They need silence approval, help someone to look the other way, maybe even someone to sign the same dotted lines. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Bondi stood. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow we will start digging again." The next morning brought storm clouds, literally and politically. Rain lashed the runway as Bondi's military transport lifted off, bound for Washington. She sat by the window, eyes locked on the gray sky outside. In her lap rested a secure tablet. It contained all 17 cases tied to Chen. But now a red-tagged folder has been added: suspicious judicial activity, Third Circuit review pending. That meant another judge, another district, another pattern. As the aircraft leveled, Bondi opened the folder. Emails, wire transfers, familiar names. And at the center of it all, a signature she'd seen before. Her jaw clenched. The corruption wasn't isolated. It was systemic. This wasn't just about Edward Chen. It was bigger, much bigger, and she had just become the face of the fight. 2 days later, Colonel Pam Bondi stood in a high-security conference room inside the Pentagon. The walls were lined with encrypted monitors, and a half-circle of high-ranking officers faced her across the table: generals, deputy secretaries, and legal advisors. At the center sat General Raymond Lawton, chairman of the Joint Military Oversight Board. His face was unreadable, but the room held a stillness that made it clear everyone had read the reports. "You've made quite a mess," Colonel Lawton said finally, "which means you've done something right." Bondi remained at attention. "Sir," General Lawton leaned back, "the evidence is extensive. You didn't just catch Chen with his hand in the till. You exposed a rot we didn't even know was there." "Respectfully," Sir Bondi replied, "I believe we did know. We just stopped looking." A ripple went through the room. A few heads turned. Bondi continued. "Chen's corruption wasn't clever, it was confident. He didn't try to cover his tracks. He operated like someone who'd been protected for years. That protection came from silence and from fear." The legal counsel to the Joint Chiefs interjected. "Colonel, are you suggesting a broader conspiracy?" "I'm suggesting a culture," Bondi said, "where influence overrides integrity, where whistleblowers are discredited, where the system favors reputation over accountability." Silence. Then General Lawton nodded slowly. "And where do you believe that culture leads next?" "To the next Chen. Smarter, be more careful, and more dangerous." He studied her for a moment. "What would you propose?" Bondi didn't hesitate. "We need an independent review board, composed of external auditors, legal observers, and military ethics officers. They need clearance reach and the authority to suspend proceedings where misconduct is suspected." Another officer raised an eyebrow. "That would shake the foundations of the current judiciary. It's time someone did." Lofton smiled faintly. "You just might be the most dangerous person in this room, Colonel." "Sir, I certainly hope so." He looked at the others. "Start drafting it. If there's going to be a cleanup, we'll need her on point." Later that afternoon, Bondi walked through the Pentagon's central courtyard, the sun reflecting off the stone walkways. She had just been debriefed by the Office of Inspector General and handed temporary command over a new task force. Task Force Sentinel. Its mission to investigate judicial irregularities across the military justice system. Captain Elena Park would be her executive officer. Agent Rivera would liaise with CID. And an entire backlog of classified files, once sealed by Chen and his allies, was now open for review. As she stepped into the elevator, Bondi caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. Not tired, not afraid, just focused. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring what was broken before more lives were destroyed by power unchecked. Back at Maxwell Air Force Base, the legal wing had become a different place. Where fear once ruled, determination had taken root. The name Chen was now whispered less like a threat and more like a warning. And behind closed doors, people were finally talking about other judges, about overlooked rulings, about things they'd seen but never dared report. Colonel Pam Bondi moved swiftly through the halls, a rolling cart of sealed case files, pushed by Captain Park beside her. "These are all from the 3rd Judicial Region, Park said, tapping the top file. "We found 17 rulings that mirror Chen's tactics, same language in the dismissals, same timeline for sealed evidence, and in 3 cases the same defense attorneys were denied discovery." Bondi's jaw tightened. Patterns don't lie. They rolled the files into the new task force office, a secure, converted intelligence suite 3 floors below the main courtroom. On the walls, a timeline was already being drawn. Red pins marked judicial irregularities. Blue pins marked Gulfstream-linked contracts. Yellow pins marked active whistleblower suppression cases. It looked like a battlefield. Agent Rivera stood at the far end, arms folded. 2 more judges are under internal review. CID is checking their finances now. Bondi raised an eyebrow. Same offshore accounts, different banks. Same shell structure. All roads lead back to a consulting firm in Virginia, Arcadia Solutions. Captain Park scanned a file. Arcadia's founder is a former civilian procurement officer. He resigned quietly 7 years ago. Guess who signed his severance? Rivera already had the answer. Chen. Bondi took a breath. The pieces weren't just connected, they had been organized, engineered. "We're not just dealing with judicial misconduct," she said. "We're dealing with a criminal network operating inside the justice system." Rivera nodded. "And they're scared. Word's gotten out. We've already had 2 anonymous tip-offs from military clerks who were too afraid to come forward before." Bondi looked at the map on the wall again. It was spreading. That night she sat alone in her quarters, the silence interrupted only by the steady hum of the base generator. On her desk sat a folder she hadn't opened in years, her father's old service records. He had been a military police officer, once stationed at a base where a similar scandal nearly broke but got buried. She now saw the parallels. Back then her father had been silenced, threatened, transferred without reason. Now she understood why he never spoke about it. The system hadn't failed him, it had betrayed him. Bondi closed the folder and looked out the window. Rain slid down the glass like quiet reminders. This fight had never really started with Chen. It had started long before. And she wasn't going to let it end until the rot was ripped out for good. 2 weeks later, the Pentagon held a rare joint press briefing broadcast across all military networks and closed to civilian media. Colonel Pam Bondi stood beside General Raymond Lawton and Deputy Director Lauren Vasquez. Behind them, a large screen displayed the official seal of Task Force Sentinel. The mission was no longer covert. It was now public. Lawton spoke first. "Today we announce the formal investigation of 7 federal military judges, 3 high-ranking procurement officers, and 1 former contracting firm, Arcadia Solutions, on charges ranging from judicial corruption to racketeering under the Military Integrity Act." He paused, scanning the room. None of this would have come to light without the work of Colonel Pam Bondi and her legal team. Bondi stepped forward. She didn't speak like a prosecutor, she spoke like a soldier. There is no justice when judges become merchants. No order when verdicts are for sale. And no discipline when silence is rewarded. We have allowed the bench to become a shield for men who hide behind the law instead of serving it. She turned toward the rows of uniformed officers, many of whom had never seen a tribunal overturned, let alone a judge handcuffed. "Let this be a warning," she said. "No rank, no robe, and no reputation will protect those who betray the uniform." The room erupted in applause. But behind her, calm Bondi knew this wasn't a victory lap. It was a warning shot. Back at Maxwell, Chen's former chambers had been emptied. His name scrubbed from the directory. His files were sealed and moved to a secure evidence facility in Virginia. But his shadow lingered. In the weeks that followed, 2 more judges stepped down quietly. Others requested transfers. Still more faced inquiry as Task Force Sentinel dug through archives, audit trails, and whispers that were finally being heard. Bondi worked 12-hour days. Her desk was a battlefield of redacted documents, wire transfer ledgers, and newly declassified whistleblower reports. But now every step forward felt earned, and every silence broken felt like one less victim trapped beneath the weight of institutional betrayal. Late one evening she received a call from Captain Park. "Ma'am, we got him." Bondi paused. "Who? The Arcadia founder, Darius Kell. He tried boarding a flight out of the country." FBI picked him up at the gate. Bondi leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It wasn't over. Not by far, but now they had the architect. She opened her laptop and created a new folder. Arcadia, primary target. Inside, she began building her next case. Because that's what justice demanded. Not revenge, not headlines, but follow-through. And Bondi had never been one to leave a job unfinished.